Welcome to the Joke Zero podcast, where we talk about all things indie filmmaking. I'm your host, Anna Roisman, and I'm so excited because this podcast is going to focus on Joke Zero's first ever feature film, Plan B, which will be available for you to watch on September 27th. And we're going to be talking every episode with some guests who are behind the camera, some of our stars from the film. And today, for our first episode, we are talking to the founder of Joke Zero and the director and co-writer and producer of this movie, Plan B, Brandon Tamburri. Brandon, what's up?
Hey Anna, great to see
Hey,
you, and I'm really excited to be on this podcast with you.
thank you. Thank you for bringing me on to host. This is a very fun project, and thank you for bringing me on to the movie as well. I get to play a small role, so
Yeah, no, it was my absolute pleasure. I'm excited to have this podcast to be able to reminisce on some of the good times that were had on set, really what goes into making a movie, and yeah, really just a lot of fun stuff to talk about.
so much. And you're very inspiring because I feel like you've not only founded your own production company, but you've also produced a major movie with a ton of big stars and big names in it, like John Heder, Jamie Lee, Tom Berenger, Kate Flannery. I mean, the list goes on. So I'm excited to hear how this all came to fruition. But first, we got to start with how did you get involved in this crazy entertainment industry?
So for me, just growing up, I always knew that I not necessarily wanted to be a filmmaker. I wanted to work in comedy. I had a video camera growing up and would always be filming sketches and short comedy films with friends and neighbors, siblings, pretty much anyone who was willing to act in these movies. I even acted in some of them. And then as I got older throughout high school, I was still doing this, and the movies actually were, I don't want to say they were good, but they were a lot better than what you would expect from a high school kid, to the point where once I got into college, I kind of knew that that's what I wanted to do. I was a senior in high school and started writing my first feature film script. And then I went into college and decided I was going to major in film and really just try to make a career out of it.
So you always wanted to do like the writing. You didn't have the acting bug as a child. You wanted to write and direct.
I wanted to write and direct. A funny story is that while I was trying to really just get some experience in the film and entertainment industry throughout college, I was really just volunteering on local productions to be a production assistant on firstly movies that ended up like never even getting made, kind of just showing up for a weekend and working as a PA on these movies. Some of them ended up getting made. And I did actually do some acting back then, really just to get some experience on set. I would be an extra mainly at first, and then I started meeting some people and ended up getting like a few lines in local productions and things like that. But I wasn't really super interested in it. My passion was behind the camera, and I really just did that to get some extra experience on set and make connections.
Mhm. That's really cool. Now we have to talk about your resume. You were very young, I guess straight out of college. You started working at a production company and you got to work on a big film like Hereditary, which I'm a huge fan of. I love horror movies. So I want to hear what that was like.
Yeah, so working on Hereditary was a great experience. You mentioned like right out of college. I must have been like 22 or 23 and was an associate producer on this movie. And really, like probably if within the first year out of college, I got a job working as the assistant to a movie producer who ended up being one of the producers on Hereditary and a bunch of other films. So I pretty much got pulled into any project he was working on. And we kind of just hit the jackpot with Hereditary. It was really like a low budget horror independent film, and it ended up getting into Sundance and sold to A24, who now is even bigger than they were back then. They're like the number one indie distributor, and they ended up giving it a wide release at Sundance. This movie got such good reviews, like best possible reviews from critics. A24 is like, we're going to give this a wide release, and it made over $80 million at the box office. I unfortunately didn't get any of that.
You made $74 million from it, no?
I wish I made $0 from Hereditary, but just being able to be involved with a movie like that really was great from such a young age. I almost got spoiled a little bit because I kind of got that mindset of like, okay, this is how you do it. You make an independent film, you get into Sundance, you sell it to A24, and I kind of learned firsthand by making Plan B that it's not that easy.
Were you on set with Hereditary? Like, were you there day to day?
I was not there every day. I was there kind of in and out. So I was doing a lot of stuff in the production office. Like anytime that I wasn't actually on set, I was mainly working on things on the movie. I went out for like a week in pre-production, which was super cool. We actually filmed in Salt Lake City, Utah, and yeah, so it was just really cool being able to interact with the crew and really just learn all about the industry and how a movie like that actually works.
Yeah. And then after you were saying before, you learned that Plan B, you don't just write a feature, produce it, and go to Sundance and get a movie released and become a filmmaker. It's not so easy. But you said you did a couple short films as well. Did you do those post Hereditary job or?
Yeah, so I think working on Hereditary kind of gave me the directing bug. Like, all right, I want to go make something. I hadn't really actually, I guess in college I did a couple little short films, but like nothing that I would ever want anyone to actually watch. And at this point, I think I was probably like 2 years out of school. It was like 2018. And I figured, like, why not just make a short film? I had a short film script that I wrote as a college project. I never actually shot it though. Well, part of the reason why I never shot it, I mentioned I was a film major in college. I ended up switching to a business major and just took a film minor. The film minor allowed me to take all the film classes I wanted, except that thesis class where I would be actually directing a film. And kind of the funny thing at my college, St. Joe's in Philadelphia, they have a very small film program. So it was really like a film and theater dual major. And like I mentioned, I really wasn't interested in acting. And I was having to take acting and theater classes in college. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to try to take business classes instead of these. And it turned out to be a great idea because I was able to really just learn about business. And I took a lot of those things I learned about business and applied it to the business of film.
Smart, very smart. You didn't have to like lay on a floor and breathe. I did a lot of those classes.
Yeah, and then anyway, kind of like jumping, I got a little sidetracked there, but jumping back into the short, it's like 2018. I had this short film that I wrote and figured like why not shoot it? Like 2 months later, I ended up shooting this short film and ended up premiering at some pretty cool festivals and I kind of realized at that moment again, like, yeah, I definitely want to get back into directing.
Hmm. With the short, like, did you do that? Did you raise money to produce that? Did you have money saved for it, or like what kind of budget were you working with?
So it was made for pretty much no money. We had just filmed the whole thing in 2 days. It's like 7 minutes long. I raised a little bit of money. When I say raised, I kind of got like three of my friends threw in, I think like $250 each. We made the whole short film for about like 1,000 or $2,000, which really is like nothing in the film industry. And we'll hear a little bit more about that too, because some of the people that worked on Plan B also worked on my short film.
Hmm. And it's very like you need people to do favors like that. You know what I mean? Like you don't know where anyone's going to go in this industry. I feel like if someone's asking you, if you're listening to this and you're like, wait, doesn't it cost a lot of money to make even a short film? But the fact that you can do it for nothing and then get it into festivals, get that on your resume, build yourself a little bit of like a roster of stuff you've worked on. Like that's kind of how you break in. You can't just sit around and wait for someone to hand you a big check.
Yeah, it's really all about kind of making connections. Mike McGillnick was the cinematographer for my short. He also was the cinematographer for Plan B, and we're going to have him on an episode and talk to him. Anthony Moore was one of the lead actors in my short, really funny comedian who I went to college with, and he also has a role in Plan B. There's a bunch of duplicate people who worked on both. So I think it's really all about just like getting together with your friends and trying to make something great.
Yeah. All right, so we got to get into Plan B because you mentioned a couple names, but we also have major names like John Heater, Tom Berenger. So I want to know, you have this script. It's a very funny script. Honestly, that was like why I was excited to audition for the project, but you know, you had these big names that you got in this movie. How did that happen? Like how did you go from script and idea to actually getting these people to sign on?
So I ended up leaving my job at that production company, and this is kind of like the end of 2020. The whole industry was pretty much shut down. Nothing really was going on, and I figured like, you know what? Like I had this script that I had a few scripts that I had written, but that this one, Plan B in particular, when I was writing this, I was like, I want to write something that feels like it's shootable, something that I could maybe film with not a ton of locations, not a ton of characters, no major set pieces, anything like that. Like at the core of this story, there was just a lot of, I'd say, heart and really a lot of great emotional moments between the characters. So I thought that it seemed shootable. So I always kind of had that in mind while writing the script. And then I decided to leave my production company job end of 2020 and really just set off to make this movie. And I kind of just put together a pitch deck, which for anyone listening, any filmmakers or aspiring filmmakers out there, it's really just like a half creative, half business like vision of the movie. So I had what the story was, all of the different characters, potential actors who I could see in those roles. And then it went into the whole business plan. Like, this is how much money we need to make the movie. This is what we're going to be spending this money on. This is what we plan to do with the movie after we finish shooting it. It's going to take this long to edit. This is like how we're going to try to get into festivals, get distribution, end up releasing the film, all of that stuff, and put together a pitch deck, and then really just set off and started trying to raise money.
Were you just emailing like contacts that you knew or people you had worked with or had met on other projects?
So before I did that, I actually went like a friends and family route and started just kind of reaching out to different, not that I have like a really rich uncle or aunt or something like that. So to be honest, there's over 30 investors in this movie. And I really, for this over a year, was actually just grinding every day, reaching out to people, even like say old friends from college, friends from high school. Like I mentioned that I went to school for business. So pretty much all of my friends have business jobs. They don't necessarily work in the film industry. I live in New Jersey and never lived in LA, never lived in New York. So, like, I have some film industry friends, but all of my like close group of friends, I'm like kind of the black sheep, and everyone else is doing some kind of business related job. So, they all make decent money and figured like, hey, anyone want to invest in a movie? And it kind of just added up, was able to get like $5,000 here, $5,000 there. Some people put in $10,000, and then I was able to really, like, I'd say, even make new friends. Like some of my friends were like, "Hey, this is really cool. Would you be okay with me sending your pitch deck to like one of my friends?" And I was actually able to raise like a decent amount of money to the point where people in the industry viewed it as like a legitimate project. Again, I had worked on Hereditary and some other movies before. So at that point, I had a little bit of money and really just started going out to a few different people that I knew within the industry that I met like really just over the years. And I was also cold calling tons of people, just going on IMDb Pro, which for anyone listening, IMDb Pro is a great resource. It lists pretty much every movie, every actor in the movie, every crew member in the movie. And a lot of these crew members and producers, executive producers, they put their email online and you can just reach out.
That's really cool. I mean, it feels like a daunting experience, as someone who writes scripts and, I would love to produce one of my projects at some point. I always feel like, well, I need a production company to back it, or I need people with a ton of money to do this, or I need a really big name star to get the production company. It feels like there's so many hoops you have to jump through. I feel like you started off, you were like, let me get some money to start this off. Did you at all think like, if I have to, I'll make it a short film first and then try to produce it into a feature? Or was it never?
So I never really wanted to make a short film. I already made a short that like I felt was pretty good. I did also like direct and produce some, no features, but like I directed a comedy special and like some other projects like that. But I had some directing experience, and kind of my plan, like I was really just going to go all in, put all my eggs in this basket of trying to raise money and make this version of the movie. But I was getting a lot of interest from with the script. So pretty much everyone in the industry who read the script really liked it. And there were some producers, as I was trying to raise money, that read the script and were interested in optioning it. Which pretty much, if you're not aware what an option is, it's really like a producer. Maybe they'll give you a little money. Sometimes maybe they'll give you like a $1 option, and it pretty much just gives them the rights to try to make your movie. And then once it gets made, you would get a bigger fee. So I did get some interest in the script, and I kind of gave myself like a year and was like, if I can't raise the money, then I think I'll option the script to one of these producers and maybe just take a back seat. I really wanted to direct the movie, and a lot of these producers weren't going to let me direct. They, not that they didn't really trust me, but it's like, we want to make the kind of the safest movie, and a movie with a first time director isn't always the safest.
Yeah. But it's in every area of this industry. I mean, I host professionally and there have been shows I've pitched and I'm like, no, I want to host this show. And they're like, well, we really need a name to get this on the network, and I'm not a big enough name, or same with a director, same with the cinema. Like it's very funny how much that plays into it. But I'm glad you stood your ground and you were like, "No, I want to direct it. It's my script, it's my movie, and I want to make it how I want to make it." And hopefully you feel that you did, right?
No, yeah, I absolutely did. And I will say, again, this is like throughout the whole year in 2021, I was trying to raise money for this movie. And it was around like the holiday season of 2021. It was like getting ready for 2022. It was like Christmas, New Year's. And I really only had like probably a fourth of the money raised at this point. I hadn't raised money in months at this point. I was still grinding and trying, but again, like you just mentioned, like no one really wanted to invest in a movie that didn't have any actors on board. So at that point, I was like, you know what? Like, I spent almost a year doing this. I'm going to revamp the budget, try to really get it as low as I could. I honestly cut the budget in half from like what I was initially trying to raise and went back in and decided, like, you know what? Like, I think I can really still make a great movie for this amount of money. And at that point, I was like, I'm going to give myself like 3 months to get really to reach this goal. So I was like, by like March, if I don't have like all the money raised or a start date, I'm just gonna option the script to another producer. And thankfully, in those 3 months, like it worked. I reached out to all of the people who previously invested and said, like, hey, we're gonna now make the movie for this amount of money. Are you okay with it? And all of the investors still believed in the vision. They're like, we really trust you. We're gonna stay in. And at that point, I didn't need that much more money. And like I said, I ended up just like reaching out to a few industry contacts. I didn't need a ton of money at that point with the budget cuts, and thankfully, I was able to do it in that time frame. And again, I think that was like March when I February or March I got all the money, and we were shooting by the summer.
Amazing. And what was it like getting, John Heater on board or Jamie?
Getting Jamie and John and really all of the cast was an amazing experience. Jamie came on first. I was a big fan of her from HBO show Crashing that she starred in, and also her stand-up comedy.
And she wrote on that show for years.
And yeah, she wrote on that and again, her stand-up comedy is great. So Jamie is someone that I don't want to say necessarily always envisioned in the role, but she's someone that was like on my very early casting list back from like first writing drafts of this script. Because when I was writing it, like Crashing was on the air while I was really writing the first draft of this, and I was such a big fan of that show. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. Great show about comedy. And being able to work with Jamie was amazing. She kind of read the script actually reached out to me personally, like through Instagram, and that's kind of my first interaction with her. Like once you have a script and it's being sent around through agents, like people are reading it. Jamie ended up reaching out to me on Instagram, just saying like, I really love the script, would love the opportunity to work on this with you, and kind of came on board from there. Then at that point, we had all of the financing, and I ended up bringing on a producer who I felt was like more comfortable speaking to agents, negotiating contract and things like that. And this producer really his name is DJ Dodd. We'll also have him on the podcast at some point just to hear some of his experiences. But he'd produced a bunch of movies, and I met him again. I actually reached out to him on LinkedIn, not knowing him at all. We kind of lived in the same area, had some mutual contacts, and I reached out to him on LinkedIn. He read the script, really liked it. I kind of kept him posted as I was trying to raise money for about a year, knew that he had these good cast and agent relationships, and at that point, I reached out to him and he came on board and he really just helped spearhead the casting effort. I would give him my ideas like, hey, John Heater is really who I want in this role. And he had no issue calling John Heater's reps and really just like pitching this movie in the best possible way to get them excited about it. And then I ended up having a Zoom with John Heater. He told me he really liked the script and came on board. And then after that, he was kind of like the big domino. Once he came on board, all of the other actors just said yes. It was amazing.
That's really cool, especially because I feel like a lot of people are so afraid to reach for those bigger names, Obviously, we grew up with Napoleon Dynamite, and I think what you brought to this project is just like the love of indie filmmaking. Like, you don't know if a major A-list celebrity or a B-list, you don't know if anybody loves indie filmmaking, and that's their passion. It's so different from working on like a network television show where everything is just, kind of like you get all your takes in the world. Like there's something fun and campy and just like it's like a small knit family and everyone's trying to just like get through their job because you don't have all the money and time in the world. So I feel like, John loves indie filmmaking, right? And that was like a lot of people involved.
Yeah, no, John was just such a great person to work with and great collaborator on set. He was just so fun to be around. And obviously like it kind of brought a lot of like legitimacy to the project because it went from being like this independent movie to a comedy movie with John Heater in it. So even just like the crew and the other actors, like Anna, you're in the movie in a small supporting role as a day player. Like you got to show up and be in a scene with John. So I think just having him around made everyone really excited. Jamie was super excited too because she was already on board, and I was kind of talking to her about my ideas, like what do you think about all of these? She's like, John Heater would be great. We made the offer to John, and then John was also really excited about working with Jamie as well because she hadn't necessarily starred in a movie, but was such a funny comedian, writer and a producer on Ted Lasso and other great TV shows, and again starring in Crashing, and she did have a bunch of other acting roles before as well, and she just seemed like someone who needed that opportunity to star in a movie, and her and John just had such great chemistry, and they were great together, and I'm excited for people to see them on screen.
They have such fun chemistry, I will say. And as a day player, like the improv, I feel like on set between them and also Suba, who's another actress in the movie, you really let people play. I think that's really important in a comedy movie because you're obviously hiring comedians who bring something different to the role that you didn't necessarily think of when you wrote the script. So was that a big part of it when you were, shooting this? Were you very much like, I wanna do a lot of improv. I want to see what, give people that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always been a big advocate of improv. Not again, the script I felt was in a really good place when we started shooting, but the way I looked at it is that I wanted these characters to be as natural as possible. So I really just said to really Jamie specifically and also John and everyone else, like, really just kind of go with it. Like I need you to like hit obviously these lines that are actually really important to the story, but once you finish them, like yeah, if you want to throw in a joke or something, like just go for it and we'll see if it's funny and if it lands. And I will say that a lot of funny improv jokes ended up in the movie, which is great. You, Anna, you had a funny improv line in the movie, well, on set that ended up in the movie. So really think everyone did so great with that. And once we really got what we needed, like say we'd record the scene as written and then it'd be like, all right, everyone, just here's let's do an improv take. Kind of just get us from point A to point B. You don't need to say the lines, but you kind of know the gist of it. And now at this point, everyone's kind of in the moment of the scene a little bit because we just did a bunch of takes. So I think a lot of people, especially Jamie and John and Zuba, were just great with kind of those improv and comedic beats.
Totally. And you had Kate Flannery from The Office. I mean, like, talk about comedy geniuses. You really packed it.
Oh yeah, Kate. I sorry for not mentioning Kate. She's amazing in the movie. Kind of a highlight for a lot of people that watch it. Supporting role, but really like a scene stealing role. I'd say she's going to be on the podcast as well, so stay tuned for that episode.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, Kate was so funny on set and improv some really funny lines that again ended up in the movie.
Yeah. You surrounded yourself with really funny, like hardworking, people in this industry who work a lot, and it's very obvious why. All right, I have a question for you. Now that you have shot, your first feature film, you started Joke Zero. What was like the biggest lesson that you learned throughout this experience? Because I feel like you've mentioned you will mention on this podcast how different it was from day one to like when you wrapped, and now we're 2 years later and it's finally coming out. So, what was the biggest lesson you learned?
I would say I'll kind of take it in a couple different directions. The first, I'll just say the biggest lesson I learned in terms of a director is how important it is to be a leader. So I was essentially the captain of the ship, and everyone was on the ship with me, trusting me. And when we started shooting, there definitely were some moments where I might not have handled something in the best way. And at first, I'm thinking, like, all right, what's the big deal? I had not a great moment. But then when I'm looking around and like people could potentially be doubting me for acting this way. And I was just thinking like, okay, you know what? Like I'm in charge here. Like I need to have some confidence. I need to make sure that everyone believes in me. And to do that, you need to believe in yourself. So I kind of transformed, I'd say, throughout the 15 days that we shot the movie, which is a very low amount of days to be able to film an entire movie. So even I remember by the end of the shoot, like say the last week, there were definitely some moments where like someone on the cast or crew came up to me and like really appreciate what you did there, or really like that was awesome what you did. And I was thinking to myself in those moments, like, yeah, to be honest, I think if some like say there was a problem on set and I would step up and handle it, the way I handled the problems at the end of the film were things that like if these problems came up at the beginning, I don't think I would have been like mentally prepared to be able to handle these problems in the same way.
Hmm. And you probably learned throughout that, like, you're there throughout the whole thing. Cinematographer's there throughout the whole thing. But most other people who work on this come in and out, right? Because it's not a TV show with recurring characters or anything. Like, they're just kind of in for the, same with locations. You're only there for a little short amount of time. So I don't know. Do you feel like that was something you had to adjust to? Like, oh, I'm the permanent person here, like marker here.
Yeah, so it certainly was. Like again, I worked on Hereditary, I worked on other movies that are considered independent films, but were shot for like millions of dollars more than than what Plan B was filmed for. So when you're working on an independent film like Hereditary, there's like a person to do every single job. Like if something needs to get done, there's always someone that you can call to do that. For this, it wasn't necessarily like that. There were definitely some things where I'm like, okay, like this needs to get done and nobody is hired to do it, so I have to somehow figure out how to do this.
And you were doing it during COVID, I want to say, which is also like another undertaking, testing people who had to come to set because you're working with unions and like that was that's a lot to bring on for your first project.
Yeah, the COVID of it all kind of now I think it is over in terms of the very strict regulations on set, but we were filming in the summer of 2022 where COVID very much was still thriving, I'll say. We had several, I think I forget if it was like maybe 3 COVID tests a week, but if if someone tested positive for COVID, like SAG, the Screen Actors Guild, they would have shut down the movie. And for a movie of this size, if it gets shut down, it's never going to get produced. So that was always just a very big stress going like through the entire production, just thinking like if Jamie tests positive for COVID, like the movie's getting shut down. Like if it's a day player and someone just comes in for a day and they test positive, like it's a shame we'd have to replace them. But if like Jamie or John got COVID, like, especially after we already filmed scenes with them, and they had to go quarantine for 2 weeks, like, we wouldn't have had the resources to actually finish the movie. It would have been, like, catastrophic, so, thankfully, that's over, but I really, kind of admire all the filmmakers who were able to make movies during the pandemic because it certainly was difficult, and not only make movies, but I think a lot of industries were kind of in that same boat where it was a big, kind of a big change, and thankfully, now it looks like we're on the outside of that.
Yeah, for sure. Thank God. So with Joke Zero, do you have plans for another movie? Is there a plan C coming out? Do you plan to produce films that you didn't necessarily write that, people could pitch to you at some point? Or I don't know, where do you envision the company going?
So the main goal of Joke Zero is just to make funny comedic content. I really just want to specialize in comedy. It's what I've always wanted to do my entire life. Plan B, that was important to me for really just important for it to be the first project coming out. So I do have some other scripts in the work that I have written. I have some other projects that I am now signed on to produce that I am not directing. Maybe some of them I may have written, some of them not. But really just looking to get into all different forms of comedy. That's kind of the future of Joke Zero, which is super exciting. And now that the first movie is in the can, I can really start focusing on others. And even like this podcast, for example, like I think podcast distribution and production is going to be a big part of Joke Zero's future. Hopefully, like live comedy shows at some point, more movies. Movies is definitely where I want to be. It's kind of my, I'd say, specialty and where my personal interest lies. But if it's funny, it's definitely something I'm interested in being involved with.
That's awesome. That's great. So everybody listen to the rest of this show because it's got a lot of information and a lot of amazing, like great behind the scenes stories from Plan B with all of our actors. And Brandon, anything else you want to plug to everyone before we sign off?
Yeah, I'd say one thing that I not necessarily will plug, but kind of the way that this podcast will work is I am producing the podcast under Joke Zero. So I'm going to be joining Anna on all of these episodes, really as the producer, but I'll chime in here and there, really just to talk about experiences with some of our guests working on Plan B. But again, it's an independent filmmaking podcast. It's not only about Plan B. We're going to have on John Heater. We're going to have on Kate Flannery. We're going to have on a lot of the cast members of this movie, a lot of the crew members of this movie, and they're going to talk about some of their experiences getting started in the industry and really like past projects they've worked on and how that eventually led them to Plan B. So it should be a lot of fun, I think.
It's great. Thanks so much for hiring me to help you host it. And I'm really excited for everyone to go watch Plan B September 27th.